Good morning. Are you awake? No, you're not awake. Okay. You guys look so nice, and I'm up here in my hospital pajamas. I feel bad. All right, I got to go to work after this, so I'm in my scrub. Sorry, I'm not dressed up for you. Okay, we're going to talk about some stuff. Listen, before we get started, this slide set is actually two 30-minute presentations. No, I'm not going to do the whole thing. Relax. We're just going to, some of these slides I'm going to skip through real quick, so just relax, okay? I should have pared them down, but I didn't, so most of you in recovery, give me some grace, okay? All right. All right, I have no disclosures. Nobody's paying me to be here. I don't work for any drug companies, so you can agree with what I say or don't agree with what I say, but it really is what I think about it, not what somebody else thinks about it. This is a busy slide, but let me tell you why I put it up there. Whenever I hear somebody speak, whether it's this setting or it's a medical setting, even at church, I'm always wondering, does this idiot know what they're talking about? I mean, do I really need to listen to this moron? So let me tell you why I think I know what I'm talking about. First of all, I understand the intellectual side of addiction. Okay, I'm an internist, I'm board certified in internal medicine, I'm a hospitalist in Jackson. It's a 700-bed hospital. I'm also board certified in addiction medicine. I'm medical director of Freeman Recovery. Up until recently, I had a private addiction practice in Jackson, but I sold it to Applegate Recovery, so I don't do that anymore. But I've been in addiction world for a long time, and I get it up here. Okay, I understand the receptors and all that I get it, okay? However, I'm also in recovery. And this November, thank you, one person, thank you very much. This November will be 17 years. Really bad opioid addiction. If you told me 17 years ago I wouldn't use drugs for 17 years, I told you you'd lost your mind. I couldn't go one day without using drugs. But I went to a treatment center called CPE, which some of you know about, Center for Professional Excellence in Nashville, run by Dr. Chip Dodd. It no longer exists, but it's a cool reason why it doesn't exist, because my son-in-law went and got his PhD in psychology at Trevecca and did an internship with Chip, and now Chip, my son-in-law, Dr. Shannon, and Dr. Chip Dodd have opened up a recovery center / counseling center in Murfreesboro called Voice of the Heart. So my treatment center doesn't exist anymore, but they're still there, okay? I actually went to treatment for 5 months. Some of us are a little slower than others figuring out how to get into recovery, but I managed to get into recovery, and it's been 17 years. I actually found my recovery through AA. I'm from Jackson, and there's really not, back then there wasn't any NA in Jackson, and so I found my recovery through AA, and 17 years later I still go. All my friends are there, I still go. So here's what I'm telling you. I get the intellectual side of it, but I get this side of it too, way down here. I understand it. I get it at a deep level, okay? All right, let's keep going. That's what we're going to learn. Okay, we're going to start with this because this is my pet peeve, and you guys are going to have to extend me a little grace. Just extend me some grace here and we'll move on, all right? This is my pet peeve. The word narcotic is from the Latin, it means narcosis, and it means to go to sleep. So any medicine that puts you to sleep is a narcotic. Benadryl is a narcotic. Melatonin is a narcotic. Okay, as medical professionals, we shouldn't be using that word. Now, if you're in here and you're a lawyer or a judge or a law enforcement officer, your use of the word narcotic is entirely appropriate. And it goes back to the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914. Narcotic is a legal term. It is not a medical term. So I'm just encouraging us to stop using it. Mainly because there's a lot of stigma attached to it. It just is, a lot of stigma attached to the word. All right, so we shouldn't use the word. In fact, if I hear a speaker using the word narcotic, I often wonder, do they know what they're talking about? Because they're using the word inappropriately. The other two words are opiate and opioid. We're much better about this than we used to be, but I'll go ahead and mention it. An opiate is a type of opioid. Okay, opioid is the big, broad word. An opiate is a naturally occurring opioid. So for instance, morphine is naturally occurring. You get it directly from opium. So morphine is an opiate. It's also an opioid. Let me give you an example. If I asked you what you drive and you said a car, well, thank you, drive a car. Thank you for sharing. All right, what kind of car do you drive? Well, I drive a Toyota Camry. Okay, the word car is the word opioid. Toyota Camry is an opiate. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? An opiate is a specific type of opioid. So here's what I'm saying. Use the word opioid. If you use the word opioid, you'll always be right. Okay? All right, your English lesson for the day is over. It's my pet peeve. I got it out. I feel good now. All right. All right, quickly, this is the way we classify opioids. They're either naturally occurring, so you've got the plant, Papyrus somniferum, that's the opium plant, poppy plant. It forms this latex, this little white glue-looking stuff that they scrape off and they dry it and they process it. And directly from opium, you get morphine and papaverine and the things that are listed there, okay? They're naturally occurring. And then you have the semi-synthetics. So if you take morphine and you wash it in an acetyl bath, two acetyl groups attached to the morphine and you get diacetylmorphine. Does anybody know what diacetylmorphine is? In a group this big, nobody knows. Wow, okay, that's heroin, all right? Diacetylmorphine is heroin, all right? So those are the semi-synthetics, like hydromorphone is dilaudid, buprenorphine, Suboxone, oxycodones, Percocet. Those are all semi-synthetics. And then you have your pure synthetics. You don't start with opium. They're made in the lab. So methadone, fentanyl, those are just purely synthetics, okay? Another way we classify them is where the receptor they act on. You guys know the mu receptor. We all know that one. But there's also the kappa and the delta, and they're responsible for other things like pain control and nociception, that sort of stuff. I'm going fast, I know, but I don't want to spend any time here. We're going to talk about this later. Okay, the history of opioids. We're going to kind of go through this quick, but it is interesting. I give a whole talk called The History of Opioids, and it's fascinating. It is fascinating, but we're going to go quick here. Papyrus somniferum. Do y'all remember when you're in biology, do you remember King Pharaoh's cook ordered fine green salad? Does anybody remember that, or is that just me? I'm old. That was the mnemonic you used for kingdom, phylum, class, all that kind of stuff. Well, green salad is the genus and the species. And so Papyrus somniferum is the genus and the species of the poppy plant, okay? It's been mentioned as far back as the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. That's a long time ago, guys. That's the little clay tablets they dig up in the Middle East. And there's a thing in there called the joy plant, and that's what they're talking about opium. It's been around forever, okay? They've actually found opium in like cavemen, where cavemen were, and they found them in they found opium residue in the fire. I mean, this stuff's been around forever. The Egyptians used it. Homer mentioned it in the Iliad. Alexander the Great used it. You know, Alexander the Great, 300 BC, he took all his men in Afghanistan, he marched them over the mountains into India and conquered India. Now, how do you think he got all those men over those mountains? He gave them opium, is what he did. That's how he got them over the mountains, okay? So it was used with armies to get armies to march. The gladiators used it, of course. So let's go forward. So this guy, Paracelsus, this is a turning point in opium. A turning point in the history of opium is right here. Paracelsus was a chemist, and he figured out how to dissolve opium in alcohol. And so he basically turned it into a liquid. This was very important. I want you to think about this. If it was 1500s, most people, what did they die of? They died of respiratory illnesses like TB, right? So opium and laudanum was great for cough. They also died of diarrheal illnesses like dysentery and typhoid. It stopped diarrhea. This was a huge advance for medicine. The ability to use laudanum to stop diarrhea and to stop cough. This was huge for physicians in that time, okay? Laudanum's been around forever. There's different kinds of laudanum. Has anybody in here ever seen the movie The Shootist? Please tell me one human being. Raise your hand if you've seen The Shootist. You're going to heaven. You're just going to heaven, okay? Okay. The Shootist was John Wayne's last movie. I'm a John Wayne fan. And in the movie, he's an old gunfighter, and he has prostate cancer. And he's going to die. And he goes to his physician, who's Jimmy Stewart, also his last movie. And Jimmy Stewart, the physician, gives him laudanum. It's in movies, laudanum's everywhere, okay? Paregoric was a reduced version of laudanum that they used with kids, okay? So when I was a kid, and we moved out to West Texas to visit our relatives, okay? It's a 17-hour trip in a car with no air conditioning, okay? And my mother would give me and my sister Paregoric. And we were really good. My mother, to this day, my mother's 80-something years old, she will tell this story and she will say, my kids were always so good when we were traveling. Like we were high, Mom, we were in the back drugged. The beginning of my addiction was Paregoric when I was 6 years old in the back of the car, okay? Do you know you could buy Paregoric over the counter until 1970? Over the counter. You just go in and buy Paregoric. It was laudanum, it was opium, and give it to your kid. You actually could buy a form of Paregoric called Donagel into the 90s. Donagel was kale and pectin and opium. You could buy it over the counter into the 90s. This is not ancient history, guys. This is, well, for some of you it is, but for me, that's not ancient history, okay? That's recent, all right? And then tincture of opium is something we still use today, not as much, but it's still around. Okay. What happened in 1492? Somebody always says that. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I know, I love that. You're showing your age. You're showing your age right there, dude, right there. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Yeah. And what was Columbus looking for? What country was he looking for? India. India. He was looking for India. And he wanted to go to India. And what did he want to get in India? Spices and opium. All right? He wanted spices and opium. That's what he wanted. Spices like pepper, stuff like that they didn't have in Europe. And they had to go to India to get them. And then opium. They wanted to bring it back. So Columbus set off across the ocean, and he didn't make it because he hit something called North America. Right? He hit North America. And so he didn't make it to India, but he found something else that the Indians there were smoking. It's called tobacco. And he took tobacco back to Portugal and Spain, and it caught on, baby. It caught on big. Smoking got big in Europe at this time. So I want you to just file that away in your brain. We're going to come back to that. Columbus brought smoking back to Europe. Okay. All right. Now, let's go to China. Do you remember the British East India Company? Do you remember that from your American Revolution? Remember we took their tea and we threw it into the Boston Harbor? Boston Tea Party? That was the British East India Company. They were huge. And they made their fortune with opium and slaves. They were responsible for the slave trade. You know, the triangle from England down to Africa with slaves, over to the Caribbean to sell the slaves and get sugar, and to take sugar up to New England, all right, sell the sugar and then head back to Africa, that triangle. That was the British East India Company, okay? They also, in India, grew opium. And they took this opium and they took it to China. Now look at that. I want you to think about that. In 1800, a third of China's population was addicted to opium. Think through that. There's 350 million people in this country. What if 120 million people were addicted to opioids? Can you imagine what it would look like around here? I mean, horrible, horrible, okay? And what had happened was tobacco had been introduced into China first, and the Chinese started smoking, and then opium was introduced. Well, it didn't take long for some enterprising opium user like me to figure out I could take opium and put it in my tobacco. Right? And that would make my tobacco a lot better. But then it wouldn't take me long to figure out what? I don't really need the tobacco. I could just smoke the opium. It's much better. Okay, so that's what's led to the opium dens and smoking opium, okay? And it just became a humongous problem in China. And led to the opium wars. The Chinese emperors said, just like our politicians would say, we can't have a third of the population addicted to opium. We've got to stop this. So they told the British, you can't bring opium in anymore. And the British said, oh, okay. No, the British said, no, we're making a lot of money, and no, and we're going to start a war. And they won. 1839, 1842, the British won. And so they kept pumping opium. Then there was another opium war later, 1856, 1860, and the British, and that was the British and the French, they won again. And they kept pumping opium into China, okay? You know, this carries forward to the modern time. The treaty that was in 1860, the British were allowed to keep Hong Kong, but they had to give it up. Does anybody know when they had to give it up? 1997, which is why in 1997, Hong Kong reverted to the Chinese, and they have it now. So Hong Kong no longer has any freedom that they had all those time. It's been taken from them, okay? Isn't it funny how history is to present day, all right? All right, this was the first national opioid epidemic. That's why I'm telling you about it. China was the first national opioid epidemic. All right. Frederick Serturner, this was a guy who discovered that opium, the active ingredient in opium, was morphine. And he discovered that in 1804, all right? Then, in 1844, the hypodermic needle was invented. I have a point, hang with me. Morphine is found, and then the hypodermic needle is invented in 1844. And then this big event happens. It starts in 1860, 1861. What is that big event that happened? Civil War starts, right? So I like to talk about this, especially when I'm talking to doctors, because I love to pick on surgeons, because I'm an internist, and I love to tell surgeon jokes. But if you went to a doctor's kit, a doctor's bag during the Civil War, this is what you would have found. You would have found butcher knives. What were the butcher knives for? To cut through the muscle. What was the saw for? Cut through the bone. What were the wire cutters for? Anybody know? Cut the ligaments and tendons. Because ligaments and tendons, even after you cut the bone, you can't get the arm or leg off. You've got to cut the ligaments and tendons. You're talking brutality, brutal. Okay? But they discovered morphine, and they called it GOM. Anybody know what they called it? God's own medicine is what the physicians called it during this time. Think about it. You're a surgeon in the Civil War, and you're cutting people's legs and arms off, and they are screaming freaking bloody murder. And all you've got to do is give them a shot of morphine, and they go to sleep, and you can cut their leg or arm off and not torture these poor people. It's God's own medicine, okay? All right. But unfortunately, it led to this. After the Civil War, a lot of soldiers became addicted to morphine, and they called it the soldier's disease. And it was a big, big, big problem. And guys, it was our first American opioid epidemic. I love it when I hear people talk about the opioid epidemic, like the thing that just happened in the last 20 years. The opioid epidemic. Well, it's not the opioid epidemic. It's one of at least 4 that we've had in this country, okay? I actually like to call it the pharmaceutical opioid epidemic, the one we just came through, okay? But this was our first one. This was the first one. All right. The second one was the patent medicines. And you guys know what the patent medicines were. They were, people sold them out of the, to everybody, and they had laudanum in it, and opium and alcohol, sorts of stuff. Any Andy Griffith fans in here? Anybody like Andy Griffith? There you go. You remember the one where Aunt Bee gets the patent medicine and it's got alcohol in it and she gets all tipsy and is playing the piano? And you remember that? I love that one. I love that one. That's a patent medicine, okay? And the second opioid epidemic was basically white middle-class women. And back then, physicians would diagnose you ladies with something called hysteria, okay? You were hysterical, all right? You actually probably were, it's probably menses-related stuff, or it was postmenopausal-related stuff, or it was anxiety disorder, or whatever, but you got labeled hysterical. And the treatment was some good old laudanum, which really fixed y'all. And I keep trying to get my wife, no, I'm kidding, I'm just kidding, don't record that. That part gets cut out, edit that out, I'll be in trouble for that comment. Okay, so the second opioid epidemic was the patent medicines, okay? The third epidemic came from Bayer, the people that make the Bayer aspirin. They were trying to find an opioid that would be non-addictive. And so they took the morphine and they put it in the acetyl bath and they made diacetylmorphine, which is heroin. Now guess how they marketed it? They marketed it as a cough medicine because most people that died at that time died of TB. They died, or other respiratory illnesses. They also died of diarrhea. They marketed it for diarrhea and for cough medicine, and it took off. Now, it didn't take off because of that. It took off because it was addictive, okay? But it led to the third national opioid epidemic in our country. All right. I'm going to do this quickly. The Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914 was an act that just stated only physicians could write opioids. And that was to stop the patent medicines, is what it was to do. So you couldn't put opium. This is the thing that got cocaine out of Coca-Cola, okay? Because they couldn't put the cocaine in Coca-Cola anymore. Only physicians could write these medicines, okay? Then they changed it to say if a physician wrote an opioid prescription to a patient with a known opioid addiction, the physician could go to jail. This was not part of the original act. It was added by what would later become the FBI, okay? And it led to a disaster. It just led to a disaster. It criminalized possession, use of opioids, and it criminalized doctors who prescribed opioids to addicts, okay? The problem with that, and look at this, 25,000 physicians were prosecuted. This is in 1919, guys. 3,000 of them went to jail. It's a huge thing in Memphis. You ought to look at it sometime. The guy, the Pink Palace guy that built that building, I forget what, he was a grocery store guy. Anyway, his wife was one of these patients that got addicted, and her doctor went to jail, and the mayor's wife's doctor went to jail. It was just a huge deal, okay? It was a huge mess. A bunch of physicians went to jail. But here's what it led to. Physicians, this is when we stopped treating addiction, 1919. This is when physicians said, we're out. I'm not going to jail. I might do a lot of things, but I ain't going to jail. When I went to medical school, we didn't talk about this. I had one class on addiction. Basically, an addict was someone to be avoided. If you had an addict, you tried to dump it on one of your partners. You tried to get rid of them. You don't want to deal with these people, okay? They're hard to deal with, and you can go to jail, all right? The Harrison Narcotic Act had a lot of good parts to it, but that was the bad part. It took addiction away from medicine. It stopped being treated as a disease and started being treated as a legal thing, which, of course, we know where that's led to, right? That's led to a lot of good stuff. All right. I'm not going to talk about this. The 70s, Nixon got concerned because all the soldiers over there, a lot of them were getting addicted to heroin. And he thought when they came back, there's going to be all these heroin addicts running around. And so that led to the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. That's where you get the DEA. That's where we get our schedules of our narcotics. That was also where methadone got started, okay? Let me do a thought experiment, just real quick. I'm going to get the thought experiment. Okay, everybody here, this afternoon we're going to go to the Bahamas. And I'm going to put you up in the nicest resort in the Bahamas, and I'm going to give you everything you want. Whatever food you want, whatever you want to watch on TV, I don't care, whatever you want to do. But here's what you got to do. I'm going to put an IV in you, and 4 times a day, I'm going to give you a small dose of morphine for 30 days, okay? At the end of 30 days, how many people in this room would have withdrawal symptoms from morphine? All of you. Every single one of you would, because you become physiologically addicted to morphine. Are you addicts? We're not supposed to use that word anymore. I'm sorry. We're not supposed to use addicts. Forgive me. Are you a person who suffers some substance use disorder? I can't say all that. I'm going to say addicts, but you just forgive me, okay? Are you addicts? No. So let's say that I detox you, every one of you, I detox you for a week. Then you're feeling good. You're all laying on the beach feeling good. All right, everybody's better. We're all over it. Then I come back to you and I say, okay, anybody who wants it can have more morphine. What percentage of you will say yes? About 10% of you, give or take. The other 90% of you who are the intelligent people of the world will say no. Of course, I'd raise my hand. I'll take some. Okay? About 10% of you. 90% of you wouldn't take it. The 10% are the ones that suffer from substance use disorder. It's not the substance. You get it? It's not the substance. Addiction's here. Okay? And that's what happened here. All the soldiers came back to the Vietnam War, and about 10% of them continued to use heroin, and the other 90% stopped because they were out of that meat grinder they were in over there, and they stopped. Okay, but that's where the Controlled Substance Act came from. All right, data 2000. So I told you the Harrison Narcotic Act said a physician cannot write an opioid to a known addict. So when Suboxone came along, there had to be a special law to say, except if he's writing Suboxone, a physician can do this and not go to jail. And that's the whole idea of the Data Act of 2000. It overcome the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about this real quick. How much time have I got? Where are we at? Oh, I'm good. Okay. So I've heard over and 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 over that the pharmaceutical opioid epidemic, of the 2000s was because of physicians. Okay, this is a false statement, and I'm tired of hearing it. It's not true. And I want to give you some history so you can understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. Okay? So Herschel Jick is the guy, him and his partner Jane Porter. They wrote a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980, and it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's a paragraph, guys. I promise you it's a paragraph. And all he says basically is, I've treated 12,000 patients in the hospital, and as far as I know, with opioids, and as far as I know, only 4 of them have become addicted. That's it. He was just making a comment. He was just saying, this is what I've observed. Okay? However, the pharmaceutical companies took that little letter and started going around and talking to physicians about it. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, the journal Pain, this was in the 80s. The journal Pain said, basically, if a person truly is in pain, they can't get addicted to opioids. I was taught this in medical school. I still have all my medical school notes. I kept them, much to my wife's chagrin, I must tell you. But I still have all those notes. And I went back a few years ago and found this, where the one day we talked about addiction in 4 years. We talked about addiction. And the guy actually said, it's in the notes, if you give a patient an opioid who's truly in pain, they will not become addicted. I was taught this. I was taught this. Okay, now listen, plug this in. I want you to listen. All right. Then in the 90s, doctors began to be sued for undertreating pain. I came back to Jackson in '96 after I got out of the military. And there was a guy out in California that got sued. He lost a $3 million lawsuit in 1996. I still remember being in the doctor's lounge at Jackson General and us talking about this. Like, whoa, doctors were being sued because we were under-treating pain. All right, now put all this together. If a person's really in pain, they can't get addicted. And I'm starting to get sued for under-treating pain. Now the government gets involved. The Joint Commission gets involved. I love the Joint Commission. No, I don't. I'm kidding. I don't. Okay. Joint Commission came. They're the ones that inspect hospitals and give us a certification and stuff. Joint Commission said hospitals are under-treating pain. You're under-treating pain in these patients. And we're going to come up with the fifth vital sign. Raise your hand if you've heard of the fifth vital sign. Yeah, all the old people raise their hand. Okay. The fifth vital sign, you know, in hospitals, nurses, have you ever been in the hospital and seen the little thing where there's a happy face on one end and a sad face on the other? The nurses were required to come in on every patient, every time they came in, and ask them if they were in pain. And if they were in pain, they had to get them out of pain. Okay? I remember being in hospital meetings where the hospital saying, guys, y'all need to write more opioids. These people are in pain. Well, the reason they were saying that is because it was affecting their bottom line. Because Medicare was penalizing them if people were in pain. And so the hospitals were saying, dude, don't let anybody in pain. Give them opioids, give them opioids, give them opioids. I mean, it was constant. All right, so think about all this. If a person's really in pain, they can't get addicted. They can't get addicted, right? And then we're suing because we're under-treating, and the hospitals are now pushing us to write opioids. What do you think's going to happen? I mean, what do you think's going to happen next? It just kills me that people can't put this together, okay? I mean, a lot of people put it together. It's not just me. But I'm just saying, this was going to happen. Then Big Pharma comes along. Purdue Pharma comes along with OxyContin, and they say, hey, this is long-acting. And it was. If you take this, you can't get addicted. Of course, you know, the addicts, being the good addicts we are, we got rid of all the long-acting part of it so we can be short-acting, right? Big Pharma is part of this, no question about it. All right. Anyway, that's another soapbox thing there. All right, let's talk about how to treat addicts. That wasn't supposed to come up. You can't talk about that yet. All right, what are the different ways to treat addicts? How do we treat people with substance use disorder? Excuse me. Oh, forgive me, just forgive me. I'm getting used to it. It took me like 3 years to stop talking about clean and dirty urines. It took me a couple of 3 years to stop doing that. I had to extract that from my brain. I needed a lobotomy for that one. You know, we have positive and negative. We don't have clean and dirty urines anymore. That's stigmatizing. All right. How do we treat addicts? Say it loud. Somebody said something? Well, we could send them to treatment. We got a bunch of treatment centers out there in the hall out there. We could send them to treatment. We could do psychosocial treatment, counseling, you know, get them the tools they need, right? Right? Okay. What else can we do?
Support them.
Support them. I like that. We can do that. We don't enable them, but we support them. Correct. We don't become codependent with them, but we do support them. Detox. We detox them. Start medication. Medication-assisted treatment. We're going to talk about that. All right, what about this one? We could kill them. It would work. I mean, seriously, it would work. Do you think it's ever been done? Y'all know who did it? The Nazis did. That's good. The Nazis did it. You're right. I was specifically thinking of Mao Zedong. He's the one I was going to tell you about. The Chinese guy. So there was a big civil war in China after World War II was over, and it was Mao Zedong versus Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek lost, and he and his followers went to this little island. Do you know the name of the island? Taiwan. Taiwan is where all the people who lost the Civil War went to, okay, which is why China always wants them back. They think Taiwan's part of them. But Mao Zedong won. Now, remember what I told you about the Opium Wars? China had been ravaged by opium for all of these years, and Mao Zedong wanted it stopped. And so he said, we're going to kill the addicts. And not only that, but he knew that there was a genetic component. So he said, oh, we're not just going to kill the addicts. We're going to kill all their first-degree relatives. We're going to kill your mom and dad. We're going to kill your brothers and sisters. We're going to kill your children. And they did. And it worked. For how long? for a generation. It worked for a generation. Because addiction is not about the genetics. It's a spot mutation. So addiction is about, it's a childhood disease. It's about abandonment. It's about poverty. It's about socioeconomic things, right? It's not about what he thought it was about. So he cured it for a generation, but he didn't cure it forever because it's ineffective. It doesn't work, okay? So like in West Tennessee, there's a little place called Tiptonville. When I was a kid, Tiptonville was a resort community. My mother and dad used to take us up there on Reelfoot Lake, and it was beautiful, beautiful. Anybody been to Tiptonville lately? It looks like Beirut. It looks like a bomb went off up there. It's terrible. They're eaten up with addiction. Well, what caused that was NAFTA. Now, I'm not getting into politics. NAFTA was fine, but NAFTA probably led to a lot of good things for this country. But one thing it did do is it caused industry to leave and go to Mexico and China, and so places like Tiptonville lost their factory. So the people didn't have jobs, and so they became hopeless, and they were despairing. And then they started using drugs. I want you to get the order right there. It wasn't the drugs first. The drug is a symptom of the poverty and the despair and the loneliness, okay? And that's what this is all about. So we can kill addicts if you want to, but not very effective. By the way, this has happened recently. Anybody know where it happened recently, where they tried to kill addicts? Philippines. You ever heard of a guy named Duarte, who, thank God, is not in power anymore? Duarte said, he told his police, you can kill addicts. I'm not talking about drug dealers. I'm talking about street-level addicts. The police were allowed to summarily execute them on the spot. This is recently, last 20 years, okay? You don't think it can happen here? It can happen here. It happened 20 years ago in the Philippines. It can happen here, okay? All right, the other thing we do is we lock them all up. Well, that's what we do. That's our solution to the problem. We just lock them all up because that's really effective. That works really good, in case you haven't noticed. I mean, we've been doing this for 75 years. You'd think at some point we'd stop and go, I don't care what your politics are on this doesn't work, okay? It just doesn't work. Trying to stop all the drugs from coming in this country and putting everybody in jail, it doesn't work. I mean, duh. I'm not doing anything political. I'm just saying it doesn't work. We need to stop doing it. Do you know we put more people in jail than any other country in the world per capita? Do you know whose second place is? China. And they're not even close. If you looked at a graph, it's the United States at the top up there, and China would be here, and then Russia, and then Saudi Arabia, and then Iran. I mean, it's not even close. We put more of our people in prison than any other country in this world by far. China? Really? China? Saudi Arabia? We're worse than Saudi Arabia, worse than Iran. Oh my word. Really? And most of the people that are in jail are non-violent drug offenders. Okay, listen, you rape somebody, kill somebody, they ought to put you in jail and throw away the key. You don't ever get out. Just stay in there, okay? But, you know, if you've got some marijuana and they stop you on a traffic stop and they put you in jail, really? Really? Okay, so I'm sorry. If that offends some of y'all, I'm sorry. But I just think it's silly, and I think we need to stop doing it. For one thing, just pure efficacy. It doesn't freaking work. Even if you think that's what we ought to do, it doesn't work. And I want to do things that work. All right, the third thing we can do prohibition. Have we ever tried that in this country? And that was a rousing success. A rousing success, okay? Let me do a thought experiment with somebody. Who's a brave person? You right there. Who's that? Jack? Okay, Jack, you're brave. All right, Jack, here's your question. You're Al Capone. You kind of look like Al Capone, like the De Niro character in The Untouchables. You talking to me? Yeah, okay. So you're Al Capone, it's 1928, and you're bringing in alcohol from Canada into Chicago. And you're going to sell it in your speakeasies. And I'm going to give you a choice. You can bring in wine, beer, or hard liquor. What are you going to choose and why?
Hard liquor.
Why?
Tennessee.
Did you hear what he said? He said hard liquor because I'm from Tennessee. Why hard liquor?
It's just always my poison when I drink.
Okay. But there you go. Amen. Good. But listen, there's a socioeconomic reason. Okay, you're Al Capone. You want to make money. You want to bring in the smallest volume with the highest alcoholic content. So you can bring in 1 truck of hard liquor. To get the same alcoholic content, you need 6 trucks of beer and 12 trucks of wine. Well, you don't bring in 12 trucks of wine. You're going to bring in the hard liquor, which is why alcoholism went crazy during Prohibition, because people still wanted to drink, and the only way you could drink is to go to the speakeasies. But you couldn't have a glass of wine at the speakeasies. All you could have was hard liquor, because that's all there was. Well, that applies to, it's called the iron rule of Prohibition, by the way. The iron rule of Prohibition. By the way, that's happened in the last 20 years here. So we decided that doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs couldn't write opioids anymore, which was perfectly reasonable. I'm not arguing that, perfectly reasonable. But once that happened, we got rid of the pharmaceutical opioids. So if you're addicted to hydrocodone, all you want is a hydrocodone, but you can't get a hydrocodone anymore because the drug cartels are now bringing in fentanyl. The iron rule of Prohibition. They're going to bring in, there's more opioid in a tablet of fentanyl, 1,000 times more, there is a tablet of hydrocodone. So if you just want a hydrocodone, you can't have one. In fact, the cartels are so smart, they make it look like hydrocodone, but you're really taking fentanyl, which is why they're dying in the droves. It's called the iron rule of Prohibition. Prohibition doesn't work. Doesn't work. Okay. Psychosocial treatment we talked about. MAT, we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay. Well, I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. Well, that wasn't good. Okay. We're not going to talk about this because I don't have time. Hold on. What time is it? Don't have time. We're going to skip this. This is really good stuff, though. The guy who invented the radical mastectomy for you women with breast cancer was a morphine addict. He was actually a cocaine addict, and his doctor, who was Sir William Osler, who is the father of internal medicine at Johns Hopkins, Osler used MAT. He put him on morphine to get him off cocaine. And Halstead used morphine his entire life. He was a controlled morphine addict. He used the same dose every day. He dosed 4 times a day, used it every day. You know, the only reason we know this is Osler's granddaughter was going through her attic in the 70s, I think, and she found a big trunk with all his old his private patient records. And Halstead's record was in there. No one knew about this until the 70s or 80s. That's how we know Halstead was a morphine addict. It was really one of the first uses of MAT, but it's a great story, but we're switching over. All right, let's talk about this real quick. Before I get started, let me tell you, I stole this from Stephen Lloyd. Does anybody know Stephen? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I stole this from Stephen, so if you see him, tell him I gave him credit, Jack, okay? Because he gets mad at me, all right? Stephen's sort of my mentor in this field. He went to the same treatment center I went to 3 years before I did, so he's kind of always been my mentor. So here we go. This is your brain. Right down here in your brain, right down there, is an area called the amygdala. And the amygdala is part of your limbic system, part of your pleasure system, okay? The amygdala has several responsibilities, but one of its main responsibilities is for procreation. We're having babies. It's the part of the brain that encourages us to have babies, okay? So here I'm going to ask you another question. I'll open this up to the audience, so I'm going to put it back on the spot. Let's pretend that we're in the savannah of Africa. It's 2,000 years ago, and you're married, and you want to have a baby with your husband or your wife. What are the 3 things that you need in order to have good, healthy babies? What do you need? What'd you say? She say sperm? I've been giving this talk forever. You're the first person that ever said sperm. I like that. You're right, though. I mean, the third thing I always say is sex. You got to have a lot of water, a lot of food, and a lot of sex. So sperm is sex. You're right. Okay. I like that one. I'm going to remember that one, sister. That was good. Where do you go to church? I want to talk to your pastor. Okay. So if you want to have healthy babies, you need lots of water, especially the woman, lots of food, and lots of sex. So if you do any of those 3 things, your brain is going to reward you by releasing dopamine at the amygdala. And the example I give is when I go into, in Jackson, they're called Hucks. Y'all have Hucks down here? Those little gas station things. You go in a gas station, little convenience store. If I go in a convenience store, and I'm telling you guys, it's audible. I'm not imagining this, it's audible. You know those little white powdered donuts that come in, there's 6 in a package? They talk to me. Steve, come eat us, Steve. It's audible. I'm not kidding. I walk by and I just, oh, I can't eat it. I can't have those. But if I do succumb, see, I can't eat it because I know my wife's going to know it. I'm going to come home and I'm going to be smiling, and she's going to know that I had those white donuts. She's going to know it. And she says I'm old and fat and I can't have them anymore. So, but what happens, let me ask you a question. What happens if I succumb and I take those little white donuts and I put the whole thing in my mouth like you've never done it? Put the whole thing in my mouth. You know how it melts? You know how the little powder stuff starts to melt? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, you know. They're shaking their head. You know. What's the first thing my brain tells me to do? Put another one in my mouth. Exactly right. Put another one in your mouth. I can eat a six-pack. You know, they come in bags too, you know. I can eat a whole bag. I'm not kidding you. I eat a whole bag because I'm getting dopamine just flooded at the amygdala. Eat some more. Eat some more. That's good, man. Do some more. Okay. Sex. Sex is nothing but a dopamine release at the amygdala. You know, you feel sex in your genitals, but an orgasm is actually in your head. It's actually happening at the amygdala. It's dopamine being flooded on the amygdala. That's basically an orgasm. That's simplified, but that's basically what it is. When we take an opioid, we get thousands times more dopamine at the amygdala than from an orgasm. 1,000 times more. Which is why when we're using drugs, we're not interested in sex anymore. Well, I wasn't. Maybe you were. I wasn't. Because why would I do that when I can have a lot more dopamine by using drugs? Right? So, this is the amygdala. I call this area the go area. This is the part that says go. Go, Steve. Eat some more donuts. You can do it. Eat some more donuts. All right. Now, this part of your brain over here says caudate. See that? The front part of your brain here? This is called the frontal part of your brain. This is where you live. This is your personality. This is you, okay? And that's the stop part of your brain. It's called the executive functioning part of your brain. That's the part that says stop, okay? Hey, Steve, eat those white donuts. Steve, your wife's going to know it. You're going to get in trouble. Don't do it. Okay, I'm not going to do it. The stop says no to the go. Okay? The problem is when you use drugs, especially using opioids, you reach a point, and these things are connected, by the way. The frontal part of your lip, they're connected. There's an actual connection. When you're using drugs, you reach a point where you lose the connection. You lose it. Every addict will tell you, and I can tell you, there's a point you look back and you say, yeah, that's where I crossed the line. That's where I crossed the line right there. I used drugs successfully for a long time in a controlled manner. But there was some point where I lost control of it. And that's when I lost the connection from the frontal part of my brain to the amygdala. Because when you lose the connection, you're not driving the car anymore. The amygdala is driving the car, and it's like the Three Stooges down there driving the car. Okay? I have never met an addict, ever. There probably is one somewhere. But I've never met one who wants to be one. Ever.